All right, so React Vowels Challenge, we hopefully have a good understanding of what we want to accomplish. As always with large projects or any challenge you given, try to break it down into smaller steps. Get that working, check it out, and then proceed from there. So don't try to do it all in once, I'd recommend. But all right, so React Vowel Finder, first thing we need to create a React app. So let me go ahead and do that. If at any point anyone has a question, please just stop me. This is meant to be informational, not to, don't want to rush anyone. So React Vowels, I want to do npx create React app. Let's call this Vowel Finder app. All right, so that's going to have a typo there. Give me a dash app. All right, so that's going to take probably a minute plus to download. So hopefully we could focus on what we need to do here. So after we get our apps installed, we need to take this piece by piece. Again, a lot of times we're not going to always break it down for you guys. So hopefully you guys kind of have a good understanding of how to approach it incrementally. So here we want to add a few elements. We have an input element, button element, some other elements to display a word. So these are going to be the initial elements I add in, and then we'll worry about functionality after that. So first thing is let's kind of get our layout structured, and then we'll see how to hook up all the components together. While this is downloading, does anyone have any questions either from lecture or from this challenge when you guys started it?
Yeah, I had a question. I don't know if anyone had this problem about when you save. When I was saving on app.js, it formatted out of the lot of the brackets that I had. It would take it out, like with the div and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know how to deal with that.
I've seen this. It's a VS Code thing. I forget how I solved it. I think I had to tweak something in VS Code. But yeah, it is annoying. I think I know what you're talking about. I recall it from past. Yeah, you can probably Google it and figure out how to solve it. You need to tweak something in VS Code to avoid having your curly braces kind of dropped automatically. Okay. All right, so my project got installed here. I'm just going to run my server right now. So do npm start. Oh, I need to get into that directory. So cd vowel finder app, npm start, and that should launch the React server. Default port is 3000. So currently have something running on there. Let me try to kill that one if I can figure out which one it is. Must be this project. All right, so hopefully I don't have anything else running on port 3000. All right, starting development server. Everything went right. I should get that spinning icon, which should pop up here in a second.
I have a question, Anchor. Yep. Is there a way to, because they're like when you start the React app, it comes with like a bunch of extra things. Is there a way to like start like a clean, like an empty app? Like you still have like the package JSON and everything, but you don't have like all the extra CSS pages and all the logos and stuff.
There might be a way. I honestly don't know. So I kind of just always start with create React app and delete everything I don't want. But yeah, good question. I'm not sure. I'm just going to delete all this stuff. So I'm in app.js. This is where we start our application. It's going to delete the logo that we don't want. And then we're going to start creating our app here. So create a div, class name, goes app. Okay, so let's kind of revisit what we need to do here. So it seems like we need an input element, a button, and probably like a paragraph or a header or some list to show entries. So let's just add these elements in there initially. So let's maybe do a header. Let's do vowel finder app. All right, so again, we're writing JSX here. It looks like HTML, but it is JSX. We're going to insert HTML elements, React components, or raw JavaScript. So here I'm just creating a header element and an HR element. So if I save that, we got our page going. Again, React automatically will update when our rendering changes. So vowel finder app with a horizontal rule. Can you guys please mute yourself if you are not actively speaking? All right, so we also need an input. So let's get our input here. probably need to give an ID here because we need to refer to it later. So let's say word input or input word. Okay, that's gonna be the ID we'll refer to. Type of this will be text. I don't think we need that, but we'll have it. Placeholder is always nice to have. Okay, we have our input. We need a button. So a button to submit the word. So we'll call this submit word. And we probably want an on-click handler. So I'm just gonna put this in here. Right now, I don't know what I need to set it to. So I'm just gonna make that empty. And then we need something to display all the items. So right now I'm just gonna make this a paragraph. I might change that later. I'm just gonna make it a paragraph tag. And let's say output goes here. All right, so again, let's just take a look at what our layout looks like. Always incrementally check. So we have an input button. All right, so there we go. So we got our input here, our button, and our output. Obviously, nothing happens. Like I type anything here, I click this, nothing's going to change. We haven't wired up any functionality. We've got our layout kind of ready to go already. Any questions about anything I've done so far? So remember, anything we return from a component must be JSX. So this is JSX code returning. One segue I want to quickly talk about is why do we have these parentheses here? This is one kind of caveat of JavaScript in that if you have a return statement and then you have a new line, by default, JavaScript is going to insert a semicolon right here. So right now, the way I've written without the semicolon, JavaScript's going to assume that I'm returning nothing from this function. All of this code is ignored with the return statement. So the parentheses tells JavaScript that, hey, the end of line is not right here. It's actually at the end of the parentheses. So that is why you'll usually see parentheses. Again, not required if you only have a single line on your return statement. But if you decide to go on multiple lines, you need a parentheses to kind of cue JavaScript into knowing that semicolon goes right here instead of right here. All right, so we are returning JSX. Let's proceed from here. So we got our layout going. So I think that's a good start. But we want to add some functionality. So we need to store the user word somehow. So we need to allow them to submit. When they click the submit button, the on click should do something to capture the word. So let's add an event handler. And let's call that on submit word. So this is just the function that will be called when the on-click event happens. And then we want to tie that up right here. So we'll say on submit word is what this event attribute should call. All right, so notice again, anytime we want to insert JavaScript, make sure we are using curly braces. Again, it takes a while to get used to with using JSX, but I can't just say, hey, this is on submit word, because that's not valid syntax. I can't put this in a string. So this is literally a string value that it's going to look for. We want to say call an actual function here. All right, so now when we click this, we should see that this event handler gets called. And let's actually just verify that, make sure we wired it up correctly. So we do a console log. Hey, you clicked the button. So now whenever this click happens, this function will be called. Again, the distinction I want to make is I do not want to call this right away. Because if I do it this way, let's actually do it the wrong way first. So if I actually put parentheses here, that means when this initially renders, it's going to automatically call my function immediately. So if I go back to my page here, bring up my property inspector, refresh, notice it says, hey, I clicked the button, or hey, you clicked the button, but I didn't click the button, right? I just refreshed my page. So again, that function executed right away when this page loaded. That is not what we want. So again, always remember, you don't want to call a function directly. You want to pass a name of a function, and then the on-click handler will call it when the event actually happens. So now, without the parentheses, whenever this on-click happens, on-submit word should get called. So if I refresh my page, notice there's nothing in my console because no events happened. Now I start clicking this and I get a bunch of, hey, you click this button. All right, any questions about event handling? All right, please ask if you have anything. All right, so we wired that up. Again, it's a lot about connecting a lot of wires from one place to another. So that event is tied to this event handler. That's great. Now the question is, well, we want to get the text out of this control. Does anyone have an idea of how I could get that text when the button's clicked?
The event listener and the target value.
So Edgar had a good suggestion. There's a target value we could kind of pick out of the event object. Now, if you want to accept the event object, we need to add a parameter here. However, this is not going to work in this case because the event is coming off the button. So events evt dot current target, that's actually going to refer to the button. So that's a good thought. Usually most events, we want to know which control actually started it, but this is going to refer to the button. We want to know what the value is in the input. So we could use a form potentially, or in this case, I think a form might be overkill. So in that case, I just know the ID of the element I want. This is where we go to our good old friend document.getElement by ID. We should know the name of the input. So I could copy that. Just to be more correct here, like I'm kind of copy and pasting two different values. What if I change this to be input other? Well, I'm going to have to make sure I remember to update this value. Usually a good indication of creating a variable. So again, we can create local variables. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as we know this is not going to change. So I can create a local variable, call it const input ID string. And I'm just going to do this. So I have one central place where I have this value. Again, this is not a state value. This is literally a local variable for my function. I'm going to use that in two different places. So I don't want one to change without the other, and that should be fine.
Yeah, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, is this, maybe this was too complicated, but could you do the same thing by setting like a on change on your input?
Yeah.
Or would that be, okay.
Yeah, so you could do an on change on your input, which means anytime they type something, you'd capture the value. The reason I chose this approach, and I guess we approach this because you want them to type in an entire word and process the whole word instead of processing character by character. But again, if you want to change design, totally up to you as a designer. Nathan, you had your hand raised. Sorry, did you have a question?
No, I was just answering the question. Document.getElement by ID.
Gotcha. Okay, so I've created a console variable just so I could reuse it. We get element by ID, which Nathan was going to say regardless. So we get the element. Let's say let's input element equal that. So we don't want evt, that can go away. So we're not using the event object in this case. We know we want to reference some other control. So we get the control. Always good practice to check to make sure that control exists. So I'm going to do an if input element, which means if it's not null, go ahead and do something. Get rid of our console log. All right, so assuming we actually get our input element, meaning like we didn't get deleted somehow and removed from the DOM, this should return the input element. If it's not null, meaning it exists, let's actually get the value out of it. So let's say let's user word equals input elements dot value. Again, just remember dot value is how you actually get the actual value out of an input control. This is coming back from HTML 101. So we get the user word. And then we want to do something with that word. So right now we can just console log. Let's make sure we actually get what the user entered. So again, just taking piece by piece, always incrementally testing it. So we have our event handler. Now, once we click that button, we should be able to extract the input elements and then get the value that the user typed into it. So let's make sure we get that. All right, let's take a look. So refresh for good measure. All right, let's go with cherry. Type in cherry, submit word. There we go. The user word was cherry. All right, so we're making slow and steady progress. Again, if I'm going too fast or a question pops up, please let me know. All right, so we are able to extract the actual value that the user entered. Elin, you have a question?
Yes, do you mind explaining how you refer to the ID part again using a variable?
Yeah, so the reason I opted to do this was so that if I want to change this value, both this location and this location would use the same value. There's no chance of me accidentally updating one part and not updating the other. Again, this is kind of, I wouldn't say overkill, but you don't have to do this. I could simply put the same value here and here. But just to reduce the chance of errors, I want to centralize it in one place so that if I ever want to change it, I know I can change it to this place and every other location is going to use the same value.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So, so I want to use that in case I want to change it. Again, my right to change it if I want to later on, but I don't want to accidentally forget to update it elsewhere. All right, so I get the value. We were able to get the user word. Now let's say I want to actually get my display, like the reflecting display back to the user. I want to show that the user entered a word here. So I need to use this paragraph element to actually show them what they entered. So let's say you entered this word, right? I want to put a word here. Anyone have an idea of how I can get the word right here? So any suggestions on what we can do? So we have the word in this function. How do we get it so that I can access it down here?
Yeah, use state.
Yep, state value is the correct answer. I know we spent some time on this during lecture, although it might have been kind of still confusing at that point, but we want to use a state value. So again, local variables are fine when you just want to use them anywhere in your function outside of the render. But for the rendering component, if you have a value that is going to change and your render needs to update, then you need to use a state value. So in this case, I'm going to create a state value up here. I'm going to call it, let's say, it's going to call it word, keep it generic, set word. Remember, use state is a React function that returns you two items, a value and then a function that you should be used to update that value. So use state, I need to import that. That comes from React. So import use state from React. Again, React is that library, one of the many libraries that got downloaded when I did create React app. I'm importing a function and I'm going to use that function here. So as a reminder, this function takes in one input and returns a list of two outputs. All right, so that one input is the initial value for word. So again, want to think about what's a sensible value. I'm thinking empty string makes sense. You can make it null, you can make it something else, but empty string to me makes sense. I don't want to go between null and string values. So I'm going to make this empty string initially. Again, important thing to remember, this will only run one time, as in your functions can be called multiple times when anything changes, but this will initialize the variable just one time. It's not going to initialize a new variable each time this function is called. It creates a variable once and retains that variable across function calls. So this word variable is a state value in my component. So this is my component, this is a state value. Now I have the ability to use this function and store that state value in my component. So we have the user word. Let's take that word and call set word user word. All right, so again, we are taking the value from the control and actually storing that updates our word value. All right, so again, if you guys remember from lecture, we want to always use the updating function so that React will know, hey, something's changed. Let me try to re-render everything and see if the display needs to change. So in this case, we want to show the word back to the user. So again, we put it in curly braces. That means access the JavaScript portion from above. Okay, so again, understand we want to use state values because we want our render to update automatically whenever something changes with Word. Okay, so now that we have hooked in a state value and we are calling the updating function, this part of our render should update anytime Word updates. So if I hit save, make sure my project refreshes. One thing I don't think I mentioned, if you have an error, your terminal will show you errors. kind of like how Django does for Django projects. All right, let's enter some words in. Anyone got a favorite word they want to type in?
Donuts.
Donuts.
Donuts. All right, so we type in donuts. There we go. So notice that the console was updated as before, but now we capture the word here. We store that in a state value. That state value is being used right here for the rendering. And that's why this updated when I hit this button. I didn't have to tell React, hey, re-render. That re-render happens automatically when any state value updates. So if I had 5 different state values and one of them updated, it's going to still try to re-render the whole thing. All right, if I enter a new value, let's try bananas, banana singular. There we go. So every time that updates, our render updates. Just to highlight again, I know we did this during lecture, but just want to make it crystal clear. If I don't call this function, and instead I just do, hey, word is going to equal user word. This is not illegal, as in no error is going to be thrown here. I can update, I guess I need to make this let. I can update word and set it to whatever I want. This is just like any other variable, but React is not going to know here that it needs to re-render if I do it this way. So this is bad. React won't know to update. All right, so we could do this. And I guess I could put this out, it's down here. All right, so just to prove that the value changes, but the render does not change, we could reassign word and then console log word to see if it's actually changed. All right, so I go back here, refresh. Let's add apple. All right, notice that new word is apple, but my render never updated because React's like, nothing's changed according to React. So that's why we need to use state values. Hopefully that point has been driven home. If not, let me know. But I think we get it. So that's why we use state, get a variable, and an updating function that we must use for React to be happy with us. Okay, so we are getting parts of this assembled. We are not able to capture user input, hit submit, and notice we get the word there. Any questions up until this point? Want to make sure we're not going too quickly.
Can you just go back to the code so I can look over it again?
Sure.
Wait.
Elon, question?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just trying to make sure at this point the set function for the state value, it's pretty much the same thing as a return statement from the function, like acting as a return output.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Like in your render, like line 29, you can just use word. But I would assume that's from the function. Where it's.
So this is the state variable that got created on line 7. So I can access this just like a variable. It's almost like me doing let word equals this. So it's like I created a local variable and I could use this here again, but the exception is this will maintain its state between function calls. This will always be reset. So I'm actually recreating this variable each time. I should probably pull this out of the function, but each time this function is called, I create a new variable called input ID string versus this creates the word variable one time and it retains it across multiple function calls here. But otherwise I can use that just like any other variable right here.
Okay, I guess I was trying to say, it's like, because in your onSubmit word function, there isn't a return statement. So I was trying to say, like, what was actually returned from that function? Like, what was the output?
Yeah,
since
so
there wasn't a return statement.
From this function, yeah, you're right. Nothing's been returned. So technically, the return value is undefined. However, this onClick handler doesn't need a return value. OnClick is basically saying, hey, we need to do some work. Who's going to do the work for me? It doesn't expect anything in return. So yeah, we are returning nothing from here, but that's fine because onClick doesn't, whoever's calling this function doesn't need anything returned to them.
Okay,
It just
that
needs
makes
some
more
work.
sense.
It just needs some work to be done. In this case, the work is get the user input and store that in our state value.
Okay, I see what it is now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your question. Rob.
Hey, sorry, Ankur, I think you kind of did that piece by piece, but is there any way we could just connect the dots slowly, just like run through the whole page here and just go through where we're at right now?
Sure. I
Thank
can try to summarize that. So again, we initially started with just some controls. They had no functionality. We had an input, a button, and a paragraph tag. So that's what we had with here, input, button, paragraph tag. Then we started connecting some wires. We want to actually respond to some behaviors or some events. So one thing we did was when that button's clicked, we want someone to handle that event. And so we decided to create a new function called onSubmitWord, again, made up function name. And then we're going to say when that button gets clicked, we want some work to be done, which I've highlighted right here. In this case, the work we want to do is find the input control, right? Because the text is not in the button. The text that the user enters is in a separate control. So we need to find that control via some ID that we've established right here. And then we want to get that control, assuming that controls exists. That's what the if statement's just checking for, make sure it's not null. If the control exists, get the word out of the control, set the word into our state value, which we created here. So now word is eventually going to be updated with the user word that we extracted from the control. Again, keyword being eventually, not immediately, because React is going to treat this asynchronously, meaning we're just asking React to do something. React will do it when React is ready to do it. It's not going to be immediate. But that user word is eventually going to, the value in user word is going to be stored in Word. When that happens, React will automatically know, all right, something's changed in my render. I need to try to recreate the display and figure out what actually the differences are. In this case, you're going to say, hey, Word has changed. So this part of the screen needs to update, meaning this part of the screen needs to be refreshed, not the whole thing. Any questions on there, Rob?
No, that was really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we're making progress. We're able to get the user input, show back to them. So that is some of the battle. Let's take a look at our README, make sure we are progressing correctly. So yeah, I think we completed this last part. Functionality, display the submitted word, right? We take the word from the input, display it in a paragraph tag. So I think that's release 1. Maybe I should commit here. So we have incremental save points. So let's do a quick git add. Oops, git add period. All right, always good to have some save points. All right, let's move on. So this is where it gets a little more tricky and it gets more React-y. So I assume some of you guys might have struggled with this part, which is fine. That's why we wanted to go over it. I need some grab some water in a sec. Give me like 2 minutes. I need to grab some water. Sorry, my voice is losing my voice. But let's start with the code here. If any questions pop up, let me know. I'll be back in 2 minutes. All right, sorry about that. Rob Works, do you have a remaining question?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to pull it down.
No problem. All right. All right, if anyone else has any questions again, please don't be shy to ask. All right, so we got a lot of the functionality going. How do we actually tackle this portion? Again, as I mentioned, it's probably the most difficult part of the challenge. So let's, again, try to just break it down. And this is a point where I'm going to take a small detour and create some new components. So we did this a little bit in the lecture. Just want to get practice with this. So looking at what I have here, I have all my kind of functionality kind of tied together in app.js. It works, right? I got what I want so far. But again, as a good designer, I want to break this apart into smaller, more modular sections. So that's where creating components comes into play. So I'm thinking, well, what's my functionality here? I have an input mechanism and I have an output mechanism. I see some division there, right? My output doesn't really need to know how the input is being taken in. So those are, again, independent of each other in terms of what they want to do. So I'm thinking, what if I make a component for this and then make a component for this? I could also make a component for my header. Again, these are very small components. They're going to get larger and larger with, like, again, the larger projects get. But let's create some components just for practice. So I'm going to go to my source folder, create a new folder. Let's just say components, because I always name it components. Let's create some components, just get practice. I'm going to create a my header component .js. I'm going to have, let's call it word input component. And then I could have one more saying, let's call it vowel finder.js. I don't know. Those are my components. All right, so my header component, let's create that one really quickly. We need a function, my header. Again, we need to use uppercase for components. My header, and this can be a super simple component where we're gonna get practice using props here. So let's say we need to return something. It's gonna be h2, let's say props dot text. This is all my components in return. Again, it seems really silly to create a component just for this, but I just want to do this for practice. So I'm saying this code here is saying I'm going to get something from my parent component called text. So that's going to come via the props object. So again, keep in mind, we can name this whatever we want, whatever. It's just going to be an object. Now let's actually print that out. So if I do console.log whatever, let's like take a look at what's stored in props that we named whatever. All right, so again, I want to get practice with just using state and prop values. We saw a usage of state values. Let's just quickly create my header and figure out how we can pass down something so that we display an h2 tag with whatever text the parent told us about. All right, so again, this is poor naming, but I just want to highlight, you can name it whatever you want. So I'm going to go to my parents component with its app.js. That's a top level component, and I need to import my new component. So let's say components, import my header. Oops, I forgot to export. So again, I created my component. Important step, don't forget, you need to export out of here so we can import elsewhere my header. All right, so now that I've created my component, really simple component, and now I'm exporting it so I can import it in my app.js. So I'm going to say my header from, go find it, components, my header.js. All right, so we're importing my header. Now, let's say, again, I don't want to use h2 tag, I want to use my header component. So replace this with my header. And then let me maybe query the audience. What's the missing connection between my header and what I have here? So let's split screen this. All right, so this is my header component. Was there a question? So this is my header component, and this is how I'm rendering it. What am I missing between this line right here and what I have here?
You didn't put the prop in it yet.
Correct, yeah, so this component is expecting a prop called text. That is what this code is showing here, but we're not passing anything down to this component. So this will actually be an error because there's nothing in this object called text. Here, so if I do text equals, let's say, I wanna make this my vowel finder app. cool. I could use this header, and this is flexible. So if I want to have other headers, I could use the same component and just pass it the text. Now, again, this seems really silly because all I'm doing is returning an H2. What if I want to add some styling here, right? I could, maybe make this a class name, I don't know, cool text. Like maybe all my headers are going to have cool text. Well, instead of always specifying the class name, this component does that legwork for me. As I know that my header is always going to use class name cool text. I don't know how to add that for every header I add. Again, very, very minor, saving of time there, but you can imagine how I could add a lot more functionality for every single header that my header component takes care of instead of me always rendering it on this side. So we have text now. We have whatever that text. Let's see if this works. No errors down in my terminal. All right, there we go. Notice, again, it looks the same. It is an H2 tag, but my header component is the one that is rendering this, not my app component. But my app component is the one rendering my header component. We can get some CSS practice. So what if I went here, create a new CSS file called myheader.css. And then I want to create some styling. So let's pick a color. I don't know. Let's make it grayish. All right, so it's like a dark gray, maybe a little lighter gray. Okay, so my header will use the styling. If we do import, that's what it should be like. All right, so this is now a little grayer. I don't know if you guys can tell. I can make this a little more dramatic. Make it a light gray. Hopefully it's readable. There we go. So now it's using this. I guess everything else kind of adapted that because, say, targeted by ID. So now only that header. Yeah, there we go. All right, so we can add CSS kind of for each component. I mean, sometimes you might see that, but usually you're not going to do that very often. But cool. Now every header I use is going to use the same color. Probably want to make this a class. Okay, anyway, that's kind of off our main point. So let's create some other components. So we had word input. Again, this is going to be just taking functionality out of app.js and nesting it within this input so that, again, we can reuse it for other purposes. If we want to capture the word and show like all consonants, well, we could use the same input mechanism, but have a different output mechanism. So that's why we want to separate this logic. Let's go to app.js. Okay, so I'm just going to create another component. I'm going to say function word input. All right, we need to return JSX. So I'm going to add that right now. One thing I think I talked about or touched upon during the lecture, but didn't quite show an example of it. If we have multiple elements we want to return, we cannot just return them on the top level, meaning your return statement cannot have two parent top level nodes. In this case, I'm returning input and button at the top level of this JSX. That is not allowed. That's why I have these red squiggly lines. So you need to always return at most one parent node. So that's why I recommend you always just add a div here. And then anything else you want to return, you just put it inside the div. Because now this div is the parent element that I'm returning. And that's just the way JSX works. You cannot return multiple items from JSX. You need to return one item that can have nested items within them. Orphe.
Just real quick, Ankar, before we get too far away from it, I'm trying to follow along, but when I did the whatever.text, React is saying that whatever is not defined. I just didn't see where we defined it.
Yeah, so we need to make sure that we accept the props in the function, and I think I snuck that in there. So we need to accept the props in on top of the function. But again, this is a good chance. I should rename this. Again, we should use props. Whatever is not a good name. Props is more descriptive. So let's put this out here. I guess I never looked at the console log, but we can do that in a second. But props, again, is the standard naming for it. I just wanted to highlight, you could literally name it whatever, or figuratively name it whatever you want. Okay, so this is our new word input. Again, we're just returning what we had before, but now we are nesting it within a component. So if I go back to app.js, this part is now just going to be word inputs, if I could type. This is a new component we created. Again, we're just kind of nesting additional rendering in this component. So we of course need to import it though. Let's not forget to export. Ivan, you have a question?
Yeah, I don't know if you can refresh my memory real quick, but what is the advantage of div over fragment or an empty, like a blank opening, closing? I don't remember the.
Yeah, I don't have enough authority to speak on it. I just like divs. I'm just used to divs. You could have fragments, so I think fragments are just these, right? That works. You can have non-named segments. It's up to you, I guess. I just prefer divs. I don't know why. I feel uncomfortable having nothing here. But yeah, we could leave it like that. That's fine. We just need some parent level node, even if it's an empty node. Rob.
Where does on submit word and input ID string play into this? I'm grabbing an error for both of those is not defined.
Yep.
Is that just not importing it in the word input.js file or?
Nope, we did introduce we broke some wires basically, and we need to fix those. So yeah, glad you kind of mentioned that. So word input, we nested the rendering inside of here, but now we have a problem, right? We are referring to on submit word and this input ID string, which doesn't exist in this context. It doesn't know what these values are. Now there's different ways to solve this. For input ID string, I'm thinking, well, I could just take this maybe, and I guess I don't want to put that down. So I'm gonna make this a global variable. I might rethink that later, but so this should allow me to access it here. I think that should be fine. That's still not fine. All right. For lack of better ways, I'm just gonna go with the string name. This is a little more fragile, but will work. Getting rid of that variable. All right, so we solved that by just putting the string in there. But we still don't know what on-submit word is. That exists in our parent component. So we need to tell our child component, hey, this function exists and you can have access to it. But there's no automatic way to do that. We need to manually tell word input function to call when button is clicked. I'm naming this in a horrendous manner, just to make it clear. You can name your prop values whatever you want. So I'll name this function to call when button is clicked. That's my poor choice of naming, but that's fine. I'm going to tell it which function this is going to refer to. So it's going to refer to on submit word. So I just want to make sure you understand the mapping here. This is a variable I'm creating that's pointing to a function. Now that I've submitted a prop value down to word input, my word input can take in props. And this is always the first parameter that any functional component will receive. Now here, instead of calling on submit word, I need to call props and then whatever I named my props. In this case, it's function to call when button is clicked. A long name, but that's what I named it. So that's how we reintroduce that wiring that we kind of lost along the way. So now we're saying on submit word still exists. That's in our parent. And the reason it's in our parent, we'll get to in a second, but we need to keep this in our parent. Our child needs access to it. How do we get that connection? Well, we pass on a prop and the child can call back into that function without parentheses. Mistake there. Yeah, so this function will be called when this button is clicked. Now with that, what questions arise? Okay, so now when we click this button, it will call into this function right here, because that is how we've mapped on submit word. It's referred to by function to call when button is clicked, which is called from the child. Okay, so I'm kind of rethinking this, and I'm going to make some changes just because I want to be kind of design this correctly. So notice that this input control is inside of word input. Best design practices is that this component should be the one interacting with this element. I should not have my app doing get document by ID in the app level, because this control is managed by the word input. So this is kind of a disconnect. I'm creating the control here and accessing the control here. That's not good design. We should keep everything nested. Again, this goes back to OOP. Everything should be in the same box. So here, I'm gonna kind of change this. I'm gonna create a event handler up here. event handler. And then I'm going to say, call this something, const on submit. Let's call this something else. Let's call this click handler. Running out of good names. So click handler will be a function. And that's going to call this for me. But this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get the word out of the control here and then pass it up to the parent. So in this case, I'm going to create a click handler. So this is going to be called when we click the button. We want to do some things there. So I'm going to grab the elements here. Let's get all this stuff. Does everyone understand why I'm moving this? I want to make sure I didn't just, this is not a random decision I've made. It's again, this control exists in here. Therefore, I want to access this control in here, not in some other component. So I'm going to get the control, get the user word, and then I'll call the parent function with the new word. So I'm kind of breaking apart functionality. I do all the extraction inside of my component here. And once I ultimately get the word that's of concern to me, I'm going to pass that to my parent. And my parent can call set word and then do a console log of it. So I'm going to say accept word. Oops. All right, there we go. So one question or thought you might have, why do I have on submit word? Could I just pass it set word? Set word is a function that takes in, it's this function right here, takes in our new word. Should probably be new word. Yes, and the answer is yes. You can pass set word here. The reason I might not want to is because what if I want to set the word and console log, right? If I have additional functionality, this function is not going to do it for me. So I'm just going to have another intermediate function. Again, doesn't hurt. So again, now we're going to call on submit word, which does two things for us. Calls our updating function and a console log, since we want to do a console log for whatever reason. But cool. So now we have this on click handler calls click handler. We extract the value from the user input and then get the word, pass the word up to the app. And the app is the one managing the state value. Now, why does the app need to manage the state value? That's the second part of our operation here. Because this component needs that word. And there's no way for, if I had a state value right here, there's no ideal way to pass the state value directly to this component that I'm going to create. So that's why the app is responsible for managing the word, because it's a shared resource between word input and this new component I'm going to create. So I forgot if I created that already. Yeah, I was going to call that vowel finder. So let's create that quickly. Function vowel finder. And then probably want to take in props. So let's add props right away. We want to return some rendering. So I'll add a div and app.js. All right, so it's going to copy this, replace this with vowel finder. And let's just kind of do the props up front. So let's just say word equals word. So again, this is the state value. This is the prop value I'm aliasing it to. Happens to be the same name. That's totally fine. We need to import it. So import. Did I forget to export? I did. All right, so moving this paragraph here. Again, key change. Now I need to access this through the props because that's where it's coming from. So I'll do props.word. Again, this name is matching the value I set right here. I wish I could split screen this, probably should. All right, so now we are rendering vowel finder right here. We are passing it a prop value, and I need to import vowel finder. Cool, JS or VS Code did that for me. All right, so now, again, this word right here is why we're using word right around finder. All right, so we're using word right here. If we decide to rename this, we totally could. We could say stuff, then we got to do props.stuff. you guys get the idea. I'm not going to bother you with renaming all the time. Just understand you have full control over whatever you name your props. And keep it as word. Okay, so now we, again, have separated out some logic into components, and this is the way you should be designing React apps. Don't put everything into app.js and say, cool, everything works, I'm done. Have some proper organization, because the projects are going to get larger. You don't want a 1,000-line file to have all the logic in it. Not going to be really maintainable. Andrew Tran?
I see it in your terminal, but I was going to ask, where'd your input ID string go?
Yeah, I deleted it, so I need to fix that. I'm going to put that back here. So I'll do, let's make a global variable, const input ID string equals input word. And then I want to use that 2 places, right there and right here. Sorry, I took it away. I know this is confusing when I delete something, I bring it back out of nowhere. But I do want to use the same functionality of having that variable here. So sorry, I introduced it back right now. Okay, so given this, nothing much should have changed from functionality. Like I should still be able to go here. Let me refresh, I don't know what happened there. Okay, so notice we get props here. That's what I was printing out, named whatever. It's not named whatever anymore. Where is it? It's in my header. So this is props. So as you can see, props is an object. In this case, it has 1 entry. It's in my header component. It has 1 entry called text and the actual value that I passed it. So that's kind of what props looks like. Again, just to prove that's an object, but that's not really interesting. But let's make sure our functionality has not broken. So if I enter in, I don't know, lemons. Cool. So we're back to where we were before, like, half an hour ago. We did some refactoring and redesigning, but everything still works. Now, we do have one key component that I want to get to is how do you actually find vowels? And this is where some of your rendering skills will kind of need to develop. Well, I have the word. I'm able to show the word back to the user. So I have lemons, right? But I want to highlight vowels. That was kind of the key task here. So how can I actually go through this word and kind of find the vowels in here? So I have access to this word, right, in my vowel finder. So what if we added some more logic here? So I don't want to just show the word. I want to have something more than the word. So this is where I'm going to create a function and call the function right here. So I don't want to just show props.text. I'm going to call a new function and say maybe render highlights vowels. Okay, so this is a function. Again, this is in JavaScript because we have curly braces. We can call into a JavaScript function. Oh, this is in the wrong place, isn't it? Is that someone going to tell me that?
Yeah, I was just about to say that. I'm like, I don't think you're in the right file.
Yeah, I have too many files going on here. So sorry for that confusion. So we want to do this in vowel finder. So I don't want to just show the word. Sorry. I want to render highlight vowels. So that's the function I'm going to call here. Let's get rid of split screen because it's throwing me off. All right, so instead of just showing a value, I want to do more processing. So I'm going to create a new function, call it const render highlight vowels. Run on this function. All right, so we have access. We had access to props here. We also have access to props anywhere in our function, right? Because props is an input to this component. So if I have render highlight vowels, let's check it out. What if we want to do like if props that word is empty string? Let's not do anything. Let's just return null. And then let's say, let's do a for loop. So let's do for let I equal 0. We're going to loop through our word that we are given. So props.word is what we want, dot length. We're going to investigate each character one by one. Again, you might find other ways to do this. Regex can come into play, but I'm just going to do this character by character. And let's say if props.word at I is a vowel. Let's break this apart. So is vowel equals, how do I do this? Guess we'll use regex. One of these. All right, so I'm gonna, again, this is regex shorthand for JavaScript. Basically saying any character A, E, I, or U, and the I stands for case insensitive, not to be thrown off by this I, so sorry about that. This means case insensitive, so I could have capital I or lowercase I, sorry, capital A or lowercase a, that shouldn't matter for this regex. I think, was it tests? I forget how to do this, but hopefully close enough. So I'm going to test the character to see if it matches any one of these characters, case insensitive. So again, any uppercase or lowercase should be fine. This is going to be my variable. All right, so if it is a val, I want to do one thing. If it's not a val, I want to do something else. So let's say, let's create let's elements equals. So we need to ultimately return JSX, and that's what elements is going to be composed of. So we need to return JSX. Is val JSX. All right, so if it's a val, what do you want to do? If is val, then do something else, do something else. All right, so we need to build up some JSX elements. So how can we do this? What if we, for the else case, just do elements dot push, and then we want to just push the letter. So if it's a non-val, we're just going to push the letter inside of a span. I guess we don't technically need the span, I don't think, but span is just like a div that's inline. So divs give you a new line, spans don't. The reason I want to use span is because for the other case, I want to add a class name here. And this is where we can specify some CSS styling, right? Class name refers to a CSS class we're going to create. So let's say we want to say highlights as our class name. All right, so if it's a val, we're going to apply a class name of highlight. Now, that alone has no impact on how it's rendered. But if we go to app.css, we can create a simple class to do what we want. So let's say class name highlight. Color can be, let's make that, I don't know, something. Let's go with cornflower blue. That sounds great. Do text decoration to underline it. Anything you want, you guys can, do whatever you think is best. Maybe highlight it with a background color. Let's go with bisque. All right, so we have some colors. You guys can go wild. So we have this highlight class, and now we're saying, hey, if we have something that is deemed a val based on this test, hopefully this works correctly. If it's a val, we're going to apply a class. Otherwise, no class gets applied. Then at the end, we want to return elements, because that is our JSX array of JSX. So let's see what this does. I might have missed something, but let's see if this works. All right, no errors. That's a good sign.
Curly brown, the props word.
Absolutely. That is not an intentional mistake, but easy to make. So I had props.word. That's a literal props.word. As you saw in my output, it's actually writing props.word at I. That's not what I want. I want to be evaluated like JavaScript. So I need to wrap that in curly braces. Thank you for whoever caught that. Same thing up here. I think I missed my angle brackets. There we go. Yeah, easy mistake to make. I make that all the time. Now this is going to evaluate this in JavaScript and then give me the there we go. So we got lemons. Notice it's being highlighted. Maybe not the best color scheme, but if I write any other word like banana, there we go. So it's highlighting the vowels by applying a CSS style to these particular span elements that I've created. Obviously, I've not counted them. That was one of the requirements. I'm sure you guys can figure that out. I do need to wrap up because I think I have a meeting I need to hop into. But yeah, that's the gist of it. So again, we added some logic, and this is kind of highlights why we want a component, right? All of this stuff is kind of specialized for this component. App.js shouldn't have to worry about that. All app.js cares about is maintaining the word, kind of being the middleman between between word input and word vowel finder. it shouldn't care what logic is baked into here or baked into here. All it knows is that word input is going to send a word back to it, and Vowel Finder is going to do something with the word that we give to it. App.js is not going to worry about the rest. Elin, question?
Thank you. So in your function at Vowel Finder, it returned an array, right?
Yes.
But how does it connect to the browser and display as a like text? Like how did that work?
1 second. Let me just let my teammates know I'm going to be late for the meeting. Okay. So the question was, if I go back to Vowel Finder, yes, we have an array here, and that magically gets rendered as something here. So what effectively is being thrown here, this array gets evaluated to whatever's in the array. So I could just do, I have a bunch of spans effectively. So I have span / span. We had bananas, I think. So this is effectively what this array boils down to. I think React will handle that. Normally you can't just throw it in an array, but since it's an array of JSX elements, it's smart enough to know that it can just read all the elements individually. So we get class name was highlight. So again, it's going to be B with no class name, and A, and you guys can imagine the rest. So that's what the array gets converted to by React. But yes, you're right. This is an array of JSX.
So is that it's always going to look for whatever JSX you have within that whatever holder you use?
I don't want to say always. Like you can't return just like a dictionary or an object with JSX elements. It's probably not going to be able to parse that. But in this case, an array is handled. That much I do know. So yes, we can return an array here. We don't have to kind of parse the array and like format it like we do here. It can handle taking each element and just showing it all at once.
It helps a lot. Thank you.
Ankur, would you be able to, are you going to be pushing this code up for us?
Yes, I can. I mean, I do want you guys to try it yourself. So I can definitely upload it. The video will be uploaded for sure. I'll try to find a way to upload the code too. But again, this is not a full solution because we do have, again, we have our word coming in. So let's go with donuts, right? We are able to highlight the vowels, but additional requirements were, what if we want to maintain history? So enter a donuts first. What if I enter an apple and then enter in, I don't know, cherry? I should see every single word I've entered and see the vowel count. So I want to know, hey, this has one vowel. I want to see that displayed. Again, some additional things, but the hardest part again was to kind of get that functionality working, I think. Andrew Tran.
Could you go back to your code real quick? I think you answered it. I just got lost really quick. Why are you returning elements? You can return anything, right? And it would still print it on the page, right?
In this case, I could return text because I'm inside of an element right here. But I could also take this out of my paragraph. If I did it this way, I need to return JSX because this is looking for an element. So if I did it this way, it's going to be a new line. There we go. So if I do it this way, but you're right. You're right. I guess technically in this case, I could return text from here because I was inside of an element already. So here, if I had, get some text, that'll be fine. Because we are already an element. So this could be just a string that we return. It'll be fine.
Well, you still want to be able to give each letter a different span, so storing it in an effective way, so you can give it its own custom styling. Is that?
Sorry, Lyman, I'm having trouble picking up.
Well, even if you did it this way, even if you did, you would still store it in a list. Is allowing you to give each letter its own span, which allows you to give its own custom styling. So if you just, I mean, you would still need to do it this way versus how Andrew was talking about, right?
Yeah. I guess I can't just return text because yes, I need to apply certain spans to part of the output. So yeah, I guess in this case I can't just return a string and have the styling automatically applied. But I guess the question I was answering was yes. Technically, I could return string here if all I just wanted to show was a value right here. it's already inside of an element. But yeah, in this case, this code can probably be cleaned up since I'm showing a span each time. This is where we're going to talk more about this tomorrow. So stay tuned. But we have class name here and do some JSX and say, hey, is val. Great, use that. Else use nothing. Now I don't need my if or else case. I just have one single line. And this is, again, easier code to kind of read. Now I have a ternary operator. Hopefully you guys remember those. I'm saying if it's a val, great, apply this value. If it's not, apply nothing. And this is going to do the same thing I want. Hopefully, let's verify that. Go with abracadabra. I don't know if I spelled that correctly. Yep, still works. Okay, I need to wrap up, but I don't want to rush this. So any questions from anything we went over? Did it kind of make sense how to kind of do it incrementally? So again, don't rush at it, try to implement everything. Just get your layout working, get the wires connected, test out those wires, add more wires, and then again, kind of iterate upon it and keep testing. Questions? I know there's got to be one question out there at least. There we go, Andrew. What's up?
No, sorry, I think I asked the wrong thing. Where is it unpacking the list? Like, why is it showing like the actual word? That's where I'm getting confused.
Like I'm returning an array here and then right here.
Yeah, like what is happening?
JSX can take an array that has JSX elements and know how to render it. That's the high level. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think I missed it. I think you talked about it earlier.
Yeah, again, there's some magic behind the scenes. I don't know the nitty-gritty details, but I know I can return an array and then it'll be fine when it's rendering.
Hey, Ankur, why are you passing the parentheses there in the curly brackets?
Oh, good question. So in this case, I want this to execute right away. This is different than when I have like an event handler, like if I have an on-click, which you could have an on-click on a paragraph tag. If I want to do something here, some function, I don't want this function to execute right now. I want to execute when the click happens versus this rendering. I want it to happen right now. When this is being rendered, I want all of this stuff to happen. It's not reacting to an event. It's just part of my render. I could try to put all of this code right where I have this function, but it's easier to call a function and have one line right here. It makes the render kind of easier to read. It is technically possible to do this all right here, but there's going to be an asterisk there, and I don't want to get too much into the asterisks until tomorrow. But there are some limitations of what code you can write here. So just as a preview for tomorrow, while you can write JavaScript between these curly braces, you cannot write any type of JavaScript, meaning if I want a for loop here, not going to work. You cannot write a for loop in here. It's already complaining to me. And whatever. This is not going to work. If I want to do a for loop, I need to put that into a function and then call the function. So there are limitations to what you can put between the curly braces here, but we'll talk more about that tomorrow. Okay, any last questions?
Ankur?
Yep.
Just a quick question. So I remember you mentioned something during the class. Within HTML tag, you use class and class name. Do you mind remind that?
Absolutely. So class in JavaScript is actually a reserved name, right? If you remember in Python, we could do class. Same thing in JavaScript. I create a class, my new class. Whatever, I'm not going to implement that. So class is a reserved key name or keyword in JavaScript. So we cannot just use class right here. If you do this, you get a warning. Where's that warning? That's not where I want it. So, long story short, it's a reserved keyword. It's got to be somewhere here. There we go, right here. So in the terminal, it says invalid DOM property class. You got to use class name. It's just because class already has a meaning in JavaScript, so you can't use class again here. You need to use class name. It's just how JSX is interpreting that word. So you don't want to use class because that can be confused with JavaScript class. So they renamed it to a class name to distinguish between a CSS class versus a JavaScript class.
And is that only dealing with the JSX format? And if you're trying to assign CSS class, you can still use class as
no, you're still going to want to use class name.
Even for the CSS purpose?
Yes. Sorry, I'm not sure if I'm fully answering the question, but
like if you're trying to assign that specific HTML tag to a specific class name, you can refer later to assign like a certain CSS styling. Like, are you still able to use class keyword?
Sorry, could you guide me on what to write here?
Say you can just say in your span, just call it class as just let it equals to a random name. And in your CSS style, like style CSS file, you can refer to that name. Like, can you still do that?
I'm just going to go with no, just always use class name. I don't think I fully understand the question, so I apologize, but just always use class name. You should never be using class within JSX.
And okay, I have a question related to that. Can we use like ID, and why do we use class name instead of ID? Because I've only seen it.
Yeah, we can use ID. ID is kosher, but we want to apply this to multiple different elements. ID is meant for unique elements. So if I did ID of, let's do it something, make this unique to something I. Use our string interpolation here. All right, so now each one of these characters is going to be called something dash whatever the for loop counter is. So each one of these will be unique, but I want to apply this styling to multiple different characters, right? So this is character 0, this is character 3, 5, whatever. If I want to apply the same styling to all 5 of these, I don't want to do it by each ID. I don't want to say, hey, create 5 unique CSS stylings for each ID that I create. So I want to target it by class, meaning it's shared across multiple different elements. Does that make sense? So in my CSS, I could create a style for hashtag, because that's an ID, something -1, and say, all right, you're going to get this style. But now, how do I know how many somethings I have, right? I might have 12 different indices that I need to target. Doing it by ID is not going to work, especially because if I name them all the same ID, it's only going to apply to the first one it finds, because IDs need to be unique. Classes are meant to be shared. So where did my value pointer go? Again, classes are for styling you want to apply to multiple different elements. I can apply a class to any other element. I could do it to this entire paragraph. Class name equals highlight if I wanted to. Again, not probably what I want to do. But if I apply this class name here, that means this paragraph element and all of these span elements that are vowels are going to be highlighted. IDs are meant for when you want to do only want to target one individual element, not multiple different elements. So there you go. So this got highlighted because I applied the class to it, which is totally fine. You can apply classes to anything, any different types of elements, as many as you want. Versus ID is meant, like if I want to make the first letter one particular style, I can do that by targeting something -0 and say, all right, the first item is always going to be colored red with a giant font weight. So we'll say font weight, make that 900. Again, the styling, it's totally up to us, but I'm saying, all right, anything that has ID something 0 is going to get this styling. Anything that has class name highlights going to get this styling. So if I save this, semicolon, lemon. There you go. So notice that L is red because I targeted it by ID, specifically the first something -0 is what that is. Did that answer the CSS question?
Yeah, that answered it. Thank you.
If not, please do ask again. You might see this warning occasionally. This was unintentional, but this might bother you. Just know when you're generating a bunch of elements kind of dynamically, you need to give each one of them a unique key. which is similar to ID, but key is specifically used by React. ID is used by HTML. I don't want to add too much new stuff here, so I'm not going to talk about why you need a key, but just know that React wants you to have unique identifiers via the key parameter or attribute, I guess, in this case. So now that warning should go away, hopefully. Refresh. Let's go with donuts. Cool. Any last questions before we wrap up this breakout room? I know we've been going for a long time.
Can I just say, if somebody is using a label, they'll find the same issue where if you try to use for, it will tell you have to correct it to HTML4, but it's like the class name thing.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for mentioning that, Kat. Yeah, so anything that's reserved in JavaScript, so Kat has a good point. If you remember the for attribute for the label in forms, yeah, that you'll need to rename it to. So there are some limitations or some collisions between namings in JSX and JavaScript, so make sure you're aware of those. One more thing I can mention, just because we're on the topic, you can target particular properties in your JavaScript. So let's say I want to set the background color of something. I can target this property, but the difference here is the name of this is not a valid JavaScript name. So if I were referring to this in JavaScript, I would have to do something like, what's a good example? Let's go with, I don't know how to do this, but anyway, if you want to target something, you'll do the element.style. And then if I want to target background color, I cannot do background color. This is not a valid variable name, right? This is thinking I'm subtracting color from whatever elements.style the background is. Again, this is JavaScript syntax. You can't have a variable with a dash in it. You know, that's allowed in CSS. So in this case, automatically, the rename is going to be background color, one word, capitalized. So just pay attention to that. You might run into it. Just want to point that out. So if you want to access background color, you can. Just note it's got to be background uppercase C color, not background dash color, even though that is what it is in CSS, right? In CSS, or right, background color, that's fine. In JavaScript, you need to convert that to background color to access it. But yeah, you can have a lot of fun accessing various properties of elements. I'll let you guys get to your challenges. If there's any lingering questions, I feel like lecture today was kind of confusing, but hopefully the recap of this put some of those connections in place. Bring your questions to stand down, and we will have a good stand down at 5 o'clock. All right. Anyone else have any last questions?
Actually, I do have a question.
Cool.
Real quick.
Yeah.
So in the challenge, it's saying you have to have you have to display all the submits you've had.
Yep.
Right. So is that because I think if you refresh the page, it's all going to go away. So you just mean like a way to, because you need like if you refresh the page, everything's going to go away because we don't have a database. Is that okay?
Yeah, that is actually a good. Glad you asked that question. Yes. Anytime you refresh your page, that is like resetting your application. Nothing in your history is going to be maintained. I guess the history in this case is if I enter 5 words here without refreshing, I want to see all of those listed here. Do you guys want to do that? It'll be like 5-minute task to do it. If you guys, I know you guys want to break probably. You guys want to do this, or you guys want to try to do it yourself? All right. With that silence, I'm going to say, try it yourself. We'll do it at stand down if there's any questions, but try to implement having a list of words here. So if I enter 5 words, I want to see all of them right here. But yeah, if you refresh your page, everything will be wiped, and that is expected. Okay. Thanks, guys. I'm going to stop the recording here.